My name is Terrell Bingham, and for 23 years I've taught early American history at the University of Pennsylvania. Most people spend their vacations on beaches or cruise ships. I spent mine wandering battlefields, exploring colonial towns, and reading old journals and dusty archives. History was not merely my profession, it was a love of mine. And that love brought me to Cape Henlopen State Park in Delaware during the final week of October. The summer crowds were gone. The beaches were nearly empty. Cold Atlantic winds swept across the dunes. They were bending the seagrass and rattling the branches of twisted pine trees that lined portions of the park. I rented a small cabin overlooking the coastline and planned to spend a nice quiet week hiking trails, photographing historical landmarks, and studying the area's maritime history. Cape Henlopen had fascinated me for years. Its location's at the mouth of the Delaware Bay, and it made it strategic for centuries. Merchant vessels passed these waters during the colonial era. Naval ships patrolled the coast during wartime. Countless sailors recorded encounters with storm, shipwrecks, smugglers, and pirates. Among these, none intrigued me more than that surrounding the one known as Edward Teach, Blackbeard. He's the most infamous pirate in American history. While most historians focused on his activities in North Carolina and the Caribbean, local Delaware folklore contained persistent stories linking him to Cape Henlopen. Over the years, I had encountered references in journals, letters, and oral history suggesting that Blackbeard occasionally used the Delaware coast as a temporary refuge while moving between shipping routes. Most of the evidence was fragmentary. Still, I found it fascinating. On my second day in the park, I spent several hours exploring the old observation tower that overlooked the Atlantic. The sky was gray. The ocean churned beneath powerful winds. Standing atop one of the towers, I could easily imagine what the coastline might have looked like 3 centuries earlier. No electric lights or hotels, only dunes and forests, and the endless sea that stretches out between it. That evening, a storm moved inland. Dark clouds swallowed the horizon, and rain hammered my cabin. The Atlantic disappeared between curtains of fog. That was when around midnight, I awoke to a sound. It was clanging. 3 separate clangs. Clang, clang, clang. I sat up immediately. The sound was familiar, not because I had heard it before, but because I had read descriptions of it. Heavy chains striking wood, slow and rhythmic, and measured as if they were paced with steps. The exact sort of sound sailors recorded when anchor chains shifted aboard 18th century vessels. I stepped onto the porch. The storm had weakened by then, but the thick fog covered everything beyond a few yards. And then the sound continued, and the clangs continued. Somewhere beyond the dunes, near the ocean, and then another sound emerged. It was a bell. A deep, resonant bell. The sort used aboard large ships. Its tone rolled across the darkness. It was a gigantic boom. The hairs on my arms stood upright. Not from fear, but from curiosity. The historian in me recognized something deeply unusual. No modern vessel could have close enough to shore to produce this type of distinct sound. But there they were, bangs and clangs, going off one at a time, The sound continued for nearly 10 minutes before fading into the night. The following morning, I visited a small diner outside the park. Most of the customers appeared to be local fishermen. One elderly man sat near the window, drinking coffee. His weathered face looked as though it had spent decades beneath the sun and salt water. When I mentioned hearing a ship bell during the storm, the room became strangely quiet. No one said a word. Several fishermen exchanged glances. The old man slowly lowered his coffee cup, and then he pulled his cap to cover his eyes. "You hear chains too?" he asked. I did. His expression darkened as he, just peering out of his ball cap, looked towards me. "What time?" "It was shortly after midnight." The man nodded. Then he looked towards the ocean, visible through the window. "That's him." I already knew what he meant. "Blackbeard?" I asked. The old fisherman stared at me, taking off his hat to reveal wrinkled, bald head, sun-bleached. Most of the tourists would have laughed. Most tourists would have probably assumed he was joking. I was neither of those kind of people. I'd spent years studying folklore and knew that legends often survived because they were preserved fragments of forgotten events. The man nodded slowly. "People around here still hear him." I leaned forward. "What exactly do you hear?" "The bell." He paused. "The chains." And another pause. "And then sometimes the crew." The room remained silent. No one laughed or smiled. No one even moved. It was like the air in the room was still, and no one would let out a breath. For the first time since arriving at Cape Henlopen, a feeling of unease settled into my stomach. These men were not telling ghost stories for entertainment. They were describing something they genuinely feared. These were hardy folk. People had been on the seas for years, some since they were a boy. They were not ones to tell tall tales or make up stories. That evening I returned to my cabin carrying several books and copies of old historical records I had brought with me. Among them was a reproduction of a journal written by a Delaware lighthouse keeper in 1717. One passage had always interested me. As midnight approached, I reread it. The entry described mysterious lights appearing offshore during a storm. The keeper claimed he observed a large vessel anchored near Cape Henlopen. A vessel displaying no national flag. A vessel illuminated by strange, oddly lit lanterns. The final line of the entry sent a chill right through me. "I believe the pirate Teach has come ashore under the cover of darkness," it said. At precisely 12:17 a.m., the bell sounded once again. That booming sound that seemed to rattle my cabin. This time it was much closer. I set down the journal and looked out the window. A green light glowed through the fog, far offshore, hovering above the water. Then another one appeared, and then several more. Within moments, dozens of green lights stretched out across the darkness, perfectly aligned, like lanterns mounted along the side of a massive sailing ship. My pulse, it quickened. Every historical instinct I possessed told me what I was seeing was impossible, yet the evidence was directly before my eyes. The fog shifted. A shape emerged. 3 masts carrying black sails. A ship that appeared to have sailed directly from the 18th century. A vessel guided silently along the ocean, not a hint of engine noise or running lights, no modern equipment, only darkness and green lights. And then I saw figures standing along deck, dozens of them, motionless, watching the shore, watching me. And at the center of them all stood a towering figure wearing a long black coat. A man whose braided beard moved in the wind. A man whose eyes burned with green light. The historian in me immediately recognized the image. Not from folklore, not from movies, but from descriptions written by terrified sailors over 300 years ago. Edward Teach. It was Blackbeard, and he was looking directly at me.